your stinking paws off me, you damn dirty ape!
With Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes coming out this May, I thought now is a good time to start revisiting this entire series. Now, of course, I've seen the reboot trilogy, which is Rise, Dawn, and War for the Planet of the Apes, and I saw the Tim Burton remake, and I've seen the original Planet of the Apes, but I haven't seen the 4 other films that fall after that first film, so I thought now is a good time to finally sit down and watch this particular era of Planet of the Apes. And I gotta say, after watching this particular era, I have a new deeper appreciation for this franchise than I did before. But let's get into the original Planet of the Apes, which came out in 1968. We follow Taylor, played by Charlton Heston. Him and his space crew, they go on a journey through space and time in which they end up on a planet that is run by apes, and humans are enslaved and somehow gone back to their primitive state. And Taylor, he's confused and trying to figure everything out, and then once he talks, it scares all the other apes. But long story short, and spoiler alert, Taylor, he comes to find out that he has been on Earth the whole time, and somehow the humans, they blew Earth up, and now apes, they run the Earth. Now, even though the original Planet of the Apes is not particularly one of my favorite films, but I've always had a respect and appreciation for this film simply because of that ending and the production side of things. I mean, Charlton Heston, of course, he was good in his own right in that time and era, and what he brought to this movie definitely worked. But I also love the production of this movie, specifically the ape makeup, which was, at least in my opinion, revolutionary for its time. And yeah, it's a little bit dated now, but again, you gotta, whatever older movie you watch, you gotta look at it through the lens of the year it came out. And I definitely look at that original Planet of the Apes through the lens of 1968, and I thought it worked for the time and period. The ape cast was also excellent, which 2 of them I'll get into as I go forward in the series. But then you also got Nova, who is mute throughout this film, and I thought she probably had the second best performance within this film. But Charlton Heston, his overacting is put on excellent display during that ending that everybody knows. And it's when they're on the beach and he sees the Statue of Liberty and he realizes that this has been Earth the whole time, and somehow the Earth got run over by apes. Y'all know that classic line where he's like,
You maniacs! You blew it up! Oh, damn you! God damn you all to hell!
so cheesy and yet so awesome. But of course, that ending is what everybody remembers. And it was written by Rod Serling, who wrote The Twilight Zone and definitely worked for this movie. It was one of those few endings that changed the vibe of the entire movie. Now, I will say there are elements of this movie that didn't age well, like the pacing and some of the editing and effects is a little spotty at times. Even though I say you gotta look at this movie through the lens of 1968, even I gotta admit, yeah, some of those effects and some of the editing did not age well. It is not what it used to be. But other than that, this movie is iconic and influential in its own right. I'm gonna give the original Planet of the Apes the hard eyes emoji. Next up is its sequels that followed after that, in which I am watching all those for the first time, so let's get into it with Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which came out in 1970, and it takes place directly after the events of the first film, in which we follow another space crew that also crash lands on the planet. You have Brent, in which he meets up with Nova, in which the 2 of them, they journey to go find Charlton Heston's character, Taylor, and try to figure out what the hell happened to Earth to come to this state. And they go underground and come across these mutated humans that got mutated from the nuclear bomb that destroyed everything. And they also have telekinesis powers, and I gotta admit, yeah, this is the point where the series started to get weird and doesn't really fall in line with what's happening with the apes or whatever. And the apes, they got their own thing going on, and there's a war breaking out between them, and they find the humans, and then eventually all 3 factions fight with each other to the point where Taylor, he basically blows up the Earth. And I mean, like, blow it up. Like, that's literally the end of the movie, which I think that might be the best part of the movie. I was like, wow, that was a bit dark. But no, you got 3 more movies after this. It kind of makes you wonder, like, wait, what's going to happen now? Which, again, I'll get into in a little. I do like that we get to see more Earth artifacts, but the effects and editing is definitely a downgrade in this movie. I said the effects and editing in the first movie didn't age well, but it's more apparent here though. But as of right now, Beneath the Planet of the Apes, spoiler alert, is probably my least favorite within this series. Now, is it my least favorite overall? We'll see once I get into more of the later film. I'm gonna give Beneath the Planet of the Apes the shoulder shrug emoji. Then next up is Escape from the Planet of the Apes, which is actually probably my second favorite within this series of Planet of the Apes movies, in which you follow Dr. Cornelius and Zira. Before the Earth is blown up and beneath, they travel back to the past to 1973. Everybody sees them. They're trying to figure out what are these talking intelligent apes, and it turns out they're from the future, but they don't tell the humans everything, and they become famous for a little bit, but then they come to find out what's really going on and why they came to the future, which scares the humans. And Zero's pregnant, and they're trying to protect their baby, but also trying to avoid the humans that are not really with this. But this is my second favorite within this series because I like the direction they took, in which we're getting away from all the war and jungle and primal stuff within this series. They're putting the apes in a more modern setting. And I like all the questions it asks, especially within time travel and how they were able to go back in time. And I just also like how it's basically the stepping stone and what sets everything off within the mythology of the Planet of the Apes franchise, in which how do we get to apes being so intelligent, and what do the humans do to basically destroy themselves? And Dr. Cornelius and Zero are that stepping stone. And shout out to Roddy McDowall and the actress that plays Zira. They have been consistent throughout these movies, especially these first three. But Roddy McDowall, I'll tell you more in a little bit. But this movie is enjoyable at first, but then it takes a real dark turn once the humans are trying to kill them and stop them from preventing the future. But the ending of the movie, I gotta talk about the ending, in which they did have a baby, and the baby inherited all the intelligent traits from his parents, and he gets adopted by Ricardo Machado's character, in which most people know him as Khan from Star Trek The Wrath of Khan, but to me, he'll always be the grandpa from Spy Kids. But it was fun seeing him here. I haven't seen too many things with him in it. Just watching him here, it's like, okay, I get to see more of him, and before he gets put in a wheelchair. I just love being able to see more of the charismatic side of him as an actor, and it definitely lends itself here and in the next movie. But I love the ending of him adopting the baby ape, even if we see him say mama, and it's clearly just a loop scene. But like I said, I love the direction this film took. Escape from the Planet of the Apes easily gets the hard eyes emoji from me. Though I will say this is probably the start of misleading titles from the Planet of the Apes movies. Looking at you, War from the Planet of the Apes. Then next up is Conquest of the Planet of the Apes, in which it takes place years after Escape. There is a virus that killed cats and dogs, and so they started adopting apes as house pets, and then the apes got super intelligent, and then they started using them as slaves and started thinking like, wait a minute, this is how the rape revolution starts. But this is also where I really started to figure out, because in the last movie I figured out, oh, so this whole series is almost like a time loop in which Cornelius and Zero unintentionally created the first ape, and that ape is going to lead the other apes to an ape revolution in the fall of man. Because this is where that ape uprising started, and essentially the last movie, this movie, and the next movie is basically how the reboot series came about and how it centers around Caesar, even though this Caesar and that movie Caesar are two completely different versions of Caesar. But I also like where they took this version of Caesar. Though I will say this movie is slightly more darker and violent than the last couple of films though. And even though it's not my favorite, I like how it's a continuation of that last film, and how this movie is basically the point of the story of how we get to the Apes movie in the first film. Not necessarily that point in time, but like what led to the fall of man in the ape uprising. I'm gonna give Conquest of the Planet of the Apes the thumbs up emoji. And finally, the end of the series is Battle for the Planet of the Apes, in which it takes place a couple of years after Conquest. Caesar, he is the head of all the apes, and he tries to create a society in which apes and humans all coexist together, but you get some apes, like Aldo, who is not with that. He thinks apes are superior than humans. Human civilization has basically destroyed themselves. But then Caesar, he goes into the ruins to try to find some old images and recordings of his parents, and to figure out how should he go about achieving peace. But then, of course, you have some surviving humans that's trying to wipe out all the apes, and then the apes, they're trying to wipe out all the humans, which leads to war. But eventually, Caesar, he does figure out how to be a great leader and to unite all people. Now, this movie is the lowest rated on Rotten Tomatoes as far as this series go. But honestly, I kind of like this one more than Beneath, because I feel like this movie definitely reached its natural conclusion, and the ending is kind of left open-ended, because it's like, yes, you do get the ending where we see humans and apes living peacefully side by side, but at the same time, it still leaves it open-ended on whether or not they'll get to a point where we was back in the 70s and whether or not civilization will advance to where we are now. But at least it gave us hope that humans and apes are coexisting with each other. But the effects and editing in this movie are definitely no better. It feels like we've gone back to that within Beneath, and I feel like the effects and editing in Escape and Conquest were pretty decent at best. But here, you can definitely tell, yeah, the effects here did not age well. And this one is probably the more action-oriented as far as this series goes. But outside of all that, I do like the conclusion that we reached to in this film. I'm gonna give Battle for the Planet of the Apes the thumbs up emoji. In conclusion, I do like this 5-part story arc that we went through, but at the end of the day, I like the original Planet of the Apes more because it felt like its own standalone story, especially with the ending. Like, it felt like a Twilight Zone episode, which, again, with Rod Serling. I feel like it was a good story on its own, but they wanted to continue it and reach a conclusion through those sequels. But after watching this 5-part series, like I said, I appreciate this franchise on a more deeper level now because it deals with time travel and the consequences of man and how we all destroy ourselves, and the ape revolution, and the apes and humans trying to find a way to coexist with each other. And one thing I did forget to mention is I also like how no matter what version of Caesar you get, whether it's the Caesar in this version or the Caesar from Andy Serkis, the one thing that has always remained consistent is how Caesar, he has seen both the good and bad side of men, and which is what gives him hope to try to find a way for humans and apes to coexist with each other. But he also knows in reality it's also just not possible, so if it comes down to it, he is all about his ape kind. Ronald McDowell, he also played Caesar, and he played Dr. Cornelius, and he's the one actor that has remained consistent through these 5 movies. Charlton Heston, he is forever iconic for that first film. This film also remains a staple for production and makeup, and I am excited to revisit the rest of the series.